welcome to FFBR Live, the podcast extension of Final Fight Bible Radio. It is Friday, December 19th, 2025. I'm Matt Crane, station manager of this Christian radio ministry, and today I am going to be building on an earlier episode about the history of the Gunpowder Plot, and I will be exploring the fascinating history of the politically and religiously tumultuous English Empire of the 17th century, all of which has some striking parallels to the state of affairs that we find ourselves in today in the United States of America. So I have a jam-packed episode for you today, full of history, controversial Bible issues, and perhaps even the possibility of some prophecy if history is repeating itself again right now. All right, glad you could be with us, and I'm getting started just a minute or two late due to a couple issues with the live stream, but we are now live streaming on YouTube. At the moment, it was last minute I got it to work. There's one little setting that I didn't realize that I hadn't switched on, and so I'm still learning the process, and I appreciate your patience. We are playing Final Fight Bible Radio Live, comes on live on Friday mornings at 9 o'clock a.m. Pacific time. You can listen through the Final Fight Bible Radio app, the Final Fight Bible Radio website, and now you can also watch live on YouTube. Now, the live YouTube episode it will only be live. You'll get the full unedited episode as I do it live with all the problems, with all the issues that I run into, which might be kind of fun. But at the same time, the live episode will be edited, will be taken down, and essentially I'll do some editing on Monday, and then I'll put the edited version onto YouTube, so it's a lot cleaner, it's a lot more concise and to the point. Also takes out some of the music, so I don't have to deal with copyright issues, and the finished product will be presented on Monday on YouTube, as well as the audio version on FFBR Premium. And maybe some of you are wondering, well, how come the full episode of FFBR Live is available for free on YouTube, but only available to premium subscribers if you want the whole thing on unedited in audio? And to be honest, that is something I'm going to be addressing probably in the new year. So stay tuned for that. But it does pay to have FFBR Premium for several reasons. It's only $5 a month. Right now you have the unlimited holiday music that you can tune into while you're getting ready for Christmas celebrations. Good, conservative, Bible-believing Christmas music. And I know that for some of you that's an oxymoron, Bible-believing Christmas music. That doesn't make sense. And we'll talk about that today. For those of you that hate Christmas and don't celebrate Christmas and just despise everything about Christmas, You're the type of person that would have loved what happened back in the 16th century when Christmas was literally outlawed for over a decade by King James Bible believers, no less. I'll use that term semi-loosely, but it's a very interesting story that I have for you today, and the title of the episode is How Oliver Cromwell Stole Christmas, but if we were going to be honest, it'd actually be more like how KJV Bible believers stole Christmas, but we'll get into it. It's super interesting. If you've never heard the story of Oliver Cromwell and the things that were happening after the reign of King James, then you're in for a treat today. I do want to mention this is the last episode of FFBR Live that I will be doing for the rest of the year. So next Friday and the Friday after, I'm going to be taking those days off. I think this is like the 46th or 47th FFBR Live episode of the year. A lot of work goes into these episodes, not just the preparation of the notes and the lesson itself, but also there's all kinds of audio and video and technical and music, soundtracks, sound effects. Lots of things go into this. So I'm very pleased and for lack of a better term, proud of my work. I don't mean like prideful, but I'm proud that I was able to get 46 episodes churned out this year. That's pretty good for FFBR Live. Not to mention, this is the third video production. So really excited about the direction Final Fight Bible Radio is headed. I do want to say thank you to the listening audience that supports this ministry, prays for this ministry. Those of you that are $5 a month premium subscribers, you have no idea how much stability that has brought to this radio ministry. Just that $5 a month doesn't seem like a lot, doesn't cost you a lot. You get a lot for it. You get multiple streams of additional music. You get access to audiobooks. You get the entire unedited full clip of these FFBR live episodes in addition to about 3 years worth of archived episodes. So you get a lot for $5 a month. But that $5, man, for as many people as have subscribed, that makes a big difference. So for those of you that appreciate Final Fight Bible Radio, you like what we're trying to do, maybe you don't agree with us on everything, and that's fine, but overall you like the ministry, I would encourage you, sign up for FFBR Premium. It's a huge help. It blesses our ministry, and it's giving a little bit back to what we try to give to you. And so I thank you for those of you that give and also support this ministry over the year. I'll try to remember the first episode I do in January, kind of go over the year in review with Final Fight Bible Radio and just kind of give you a rundown of some of the things that happened in this last year. But I don't want to take up too much time for today because I've got a lot of stuff to cover. All right, finally, for those of you that have donated to Final Fight Bible Radio, your donation statements will be sent out in the mail here within the next few weeks. I try to get all of that done by the end of January at the latest, hopefully done by mid-January. So start as soon as the new year kicks off. I'm going to be putting those things out and try to get that done as quick as possible. All right, so with that, let's go ahead and take a break. And when we come back, we will get into this Bible study. Well, it's actually a history study, but we're going to infuse some scripture into it. The study of how Oliver Cromwell stole Christmas. Stay tuned.
Stars lingered over us, shepherds we commoners, watching our flocks by night. Then in the sky.
The Bible says, "In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. The same was in the beginning with God. All things were made by Him, and without Him was not anything made that was made. In Him was life, and the life was the light of men. And the light shineth in darkness, and the darkness comprehended it not. That was the true light, which lighteth every man that cometh into the world. He was in the world, and the world was made by Him, and the world knew Him not. He came unto His own, and His own received Him not. But as many as received Him, to them gave He power to become the sons of God, even to them that believe on His name." You're listening to Final Fight Bible Radio.
All right, welcome back. All right, so when it comes to this subject of what we're going to be getting into with this history, I want to point out right up front that what I'm covering today is not just dry, stale historical facts. The things that happened in England in the 1600s had monumental repercussions in the history of Western civilization, which are still being felt to this day. As a matter of fact, at that time, around the 1500s, 1600s, the world was coming out of what historians have kind of tongue-in-cheek labeled the Dark Ages, evidently not even realizing that the entire Dark Ages was when the Roman Catholic Church, for all practical purposes, ruled the world, or at least Western civilization. And so it's interesting that, a strange sideline of this history is the official banning of Christmas in England for over a decade. And I'll get to that and I'll address it and the reasons for it. But honestly, the banning of Christmas is really just a side tangent, really not even that important compared to everything else that this story pertains to. So in order to have any comprehension of the issues at stake and the things that happened and why they happened, I need to first set the scene in England as it moved from the 16th century into the 17th century, as it moved from the 1500s into the 1600s. So if you'll recall, a few weeks ago, I did a lesson on the Gunpowder Plot and how Guy Fawkes, who was working with the Jesuits, had tried to blow up the Parliament building in England and kill King and all of the Parliament, which would have also killed the New Testament or the KJV translators, which was going on at that time as well. Now, blowing up Parliament. Now, for those of you that are here in America, we don't think in terms of parliaments and kings. We think in terms of presidents and Congress and House of Representatives and senators and things like that. I'm going to be using the terms parliament and monarchy, but if you think of Parliament as kind of like the English version of Congress, you're going to get a pretty good idea of what we're talking about. So for the idea of Guy Fawkes to blow up Parliament was the equivalent of trying to assassinate all of Congress and the president all in one shot, all in one big explosion. And again, I have to stress that it's not conspiracy theory. It is absolute historical fact that it was the Jesuits, the Roman Catholic Jesuits, who were behind the Gunpowder Plot. All right? Now, why was that such a big deal? Why did they even try to do that? Well, if you understand what was going on in the 1500s, so Martin Luther gets saved and he starts preaching. He nails the 95 Theses to the doors of the Wittenberg Castle, essentially creating this official rift with the Roman Catholics, and he starts this Protestant Reformation, essentially, where the people are Protestants. They're Christians that have been just kind of all amalgamated into Roman Catholicism, and now they're protesting and coming out of the ultra-corrupt Roman Catholic Church headed by the Pope of Rome. And so Martin Luther starts translating the Bible into German, getting it in the hands of the common people, as well as William Tyndale is also translating the Bible into English, getting it into the hands of the common people. There's all kinds of persecution going on, but slowly the populace of the people is turning away from Rome. They see so much corruption in what was in those days essentially the deep state of the Dark Ages, the Roman Catholic Church. Everything you know about a deep state in America is exactly what the world was dealing with the Roman Catholic Church back in the 1500s. The Roman Catholic Church was and still is the deep state. For my opinion is, at the bottom of the swamp of Washington, D.C. is the scum. At the bottom is the Roman Catholic Jesuits. They're still the foundation of the deep state. Nevertheless, so you had this ultra-corrupt empire of the Roman Catholic Church ruling these nations, and the people were starting to come away from it. You had Henry VIII making a break from the Roman Catholic Pope and defying him. And so England had been under Catholic control until 1543. All right, 1543. Only 62 years later is when the Gunpowder Plot happened, when the Jesuits tried to destroy the entire English monarchy, and no doubt they already had a plan in place to put their own guy in and take England back. Okay, so the Catholics had lost England. They're trying to get it back. They had also lost Scotland because Mary Stuart had to flee Scotland, and when she went to England, Elizabeth I was queen. Elizabeth imprisoned Mary, and so Mary had a baby son named James, Mary Queen of Scotland, Mary Queen of Scots. She had a little baby named James, and when she fled Scotland, James became the King of Scotland by default. Elizabeth, over in England, didn't have any children, and so when she died, King James of Scotland ended up becoming the de facto King of England also, and therefore you have Scotland and England together. King James the First, the king that's written on your King James Bible. That's King James of England. All right? So the Roman Catholic Church had lost control of England in 1543, lost control of Scotland in 1567. They still had a stronghold in Ireland in these days. And so for the next really 100 years, the Roman Catholic Church was doing everything they could to regain control of Scotland and England, and they would do it in any way that they could. Like I said, they tried to even blow up the king in Parliament, but seeing as how that didn't work, they had to start resorting to subversion and more clandestine ways of taking over the government. So you have that backdrop. You have the mostly Protestant England and Presbyterian type Scotland who are very anti-Catholic. That was the attitude of the people at the time. Now, in terms of King James himself, he's an interesting ruler. He believed deeply in what's called the divine right of kings. Now, you have to remember that the world had been coming out of 1,000 years of an idea that the political figurehead is appointed by God to rule the nations, except that had been, the teaching had been the Pope, for 1,000 years. So the whole world still has this mindset. They don't believe the Pope is the ruler of God on earth, but they still have these notions that the kings of nations are the appointed elect of God who have a divine right to rule. And you can make, to some extent, an argument about that in the Bible. God has ordained government and the powers that be and all that stuff in Romans 13. We can get into that, but that's a whole side issue. But remember, they didn't have the Bible in their language for very long. People are now getting a hold of a Bible. The King James Bible is now, being made available, and people are reading the scriptures for themselves. And so they're learning a lot of things all at once because the Roman Catholic Church had suppressed the Bible, made it illegal to read the Bible. So consequently, people didn't really know too much about Bible doctrine in those days. So it's understandable that there's a lot of crazy ideas floating around at this time now that the blinding light of the Word of God has come into view for the common man. All right, so King James, he had this belief in the divine right of kings, which essentially meant that, monarchs derive their authority directly from God, that monarchs were answerable only to God, not earthly powers like Parliament or the Pope. And therefore, because the king is answerable only to God, challenging the king or asking questions or accusing the king of anything is considered as sacrilegious. He's divinely ordained. And of course, he believed it was the king's duty to rule justly within the law, but he asserted that only God could judge the king. Now, for those of you that are familiar with some pastors who can be narcissistic, I'm not saying that pastors are narcissistic, but there are some narcissistic pastors out there who who have this authoritarian, tyrannical mindset about their authority in the church. If you're familiar with that kind of a church setup, no doubt you recognize some of the problems that would come with the attitude of nobody can question me, nobody can judge me, nobody has any right to contradict me in any way except for God. I'm accountable only to God. Some narcissist husbands also have that mindset. Their wife, she can't ever challenge him or question him on anything, and the only person he's answerable to is God, or maybe his pastor, depending on how militant they tend to be with their chain of command. All right, I don't buy into that junk, but nevertheless, you can see how this abuse of authority, this attitude, this interpretation of Scripture that creates this idea that the king is untouchable was something that really pissed off the Parliament. Okay, now Parliament back in those days, it wasn't necessarily a bunch of elected representatives. These were still baby ideas that became ratified later on with the American Constitution and were slowly gaining ground in England. But the Parliament in those days was really just the MPs, the members of Parliament, were mostly wealthy landowners, people that had significance in their particular society, and so they were representatives of their town. They weren't necessarily elected, but they were kind of the most powerful people in town, and so they would come and sit and have counsel with the king, and they didn't have any actual legal authority other than they were supposed to be the group that gets to decide issues relating to taxation. All right, so if the king wanted to tax the people for whatever reason, he had to run it through Parliament. Other than that, the Parliament was more just a advisory board for the king, but he didn't really need to listen to him if he didn't want to. He was kind of supposed to. We're all supposed to work together here, but King James was a little bit of a pugnacious fellow, as one historian put it, and he didn't really care much for Parliament, and Parliament always trying to slow him down and stop him on the things he wanted to do. It wasn't that he was trying to do things illegal. He just kind of had the attitude that Parliament was more of a hindrance than anything. All right. So you have also the problem was with Parliament was they were always fighting. People couldn't ever get along. Everybody had their own designs, their own ideas of what needed to be done, and everybody had their own ambitions, and so consequently, Parliament was a mess. And Trump, and I say Trump, I want to get to that later. King James and Donald Trump seem to have some similarities, not 100%, but their situations seem to be somewhat familiar. But King James was annoyed with Parliament because they couldn't get anything done. It was just a total waste of time. And so working with Parliament frustrated him, and he believed in the divine right of kings anyway, so he had a biblical pretext for not listening to anything Parliament had to say. All right, so we have that's 1603. King James comes to the throne in England and Scotland, unites the two kingdoms. 1604, the King James Bible translation begins. That's a 7-year project that extends to 1611. During that time, and right before King James comes to power in England, is you have the birth of Oliver Cromwell, 1599. He was born into modest circumstances. He was born into a Protestant family, and he was raised under school teachers who openly taught that the Pope was an Antichrist, if not the Antichrist. All right, so that's wonderful education that he was getting in those days. so everybody in England had the attitude that the Pope was the Antichrist. Martin Luther was preaching that. The Protestants were preaching that. Everybody had the attitude that the Pope was the Antichrist. He wasn't the Antichrist, but he was certainly an Antichrist by making himself equal with Christ and even by claiming to be the vicar of Christ and several other things. All right, so everybody hated the Catholics and the popes for a good reason. But then, so when Oliver Cromwell is 6 years old is when Guy Fawkes tried to blow up the Parliament with the Gunpowder Plot. Then you have in the next year, Guy Fawkes is hanged, drawn, and quartered publicly. Then you have 1611. The King James Bible is completed and is translated, 1611. And then you have, so Oliver Cromwell in 1611, he is, 12 years old. In 1616, when Cromwell was 17 years old, he attended Cambridge University, and he was taught under Dr. Samuel Ward, who was one of the men that worked on the KJV translation. And Samuel Ward was also famous for his appearance in the Synod of Dort, where Calvinism had beat out Arminianism. And like I said, in those early days, there was still a lot of theological debating going on because people now had a Bible, they could read it for themselves. And so there was a lot of long-held theological ideas that were being challenged. And there was a lot of nuances in the various theological ideas that were also being scrutinized and challenged by the local people. All right? So there was a lot of theological debate in those days. And so anyway, Cromwell's taught in college by one of the KJV translators. So he's got a really good Protestant education. That's 1616. Now we're coming up to 1620. And at this time, King James is still the King of England. And 1620, you have the Mayflower set sail. It arrives in America in November. And in December, Plymouth Colony is founded. All right? And then in March 27th of 1625, King James, again, the King James of your Bible, he dies, and his son Charles I inherits the throne of England, the throne of England and Scotland. Now, the problem with Charles I is that his wife, Henrietta Maria of France, is a Roman Catholic. Oh, great. So this is not popular with the Protestant Parliament and the Protestant people. Now there's a ruler taking the throne because he's the son. He has to take the throne. But his wife is a Catholic. And we've all seen this story before. What happens if Charles dies and they have no son? Well, his wife becomes queen, and you have a new Bloody Mary ruling England under the power of the Pope. So it's a problem. All right? Charles I, though, he's way more aggressive than his father, James. He also promotes a form of Anglicanism that was suspiciously familiar to Roman Catholicism. So he's trying to get back to the more traditional things, the stained glass windows, the more Catholic ceremonial type of things when it comes to religion in the empire. He was keen on raising taxes to finance pointless foreign wars, and Parliament wouldn't ever get on board with King Charles, so what he'd do is he'd say, well, I'm just going to dissolve Parliament. We're just not going to have a Parliament. So he dissolves it multiple times. He begins extracting money from people through sword point, and this was called forced loans in that day. So he needed money to finance his foreign wars, so Parliament wouldn't get on board with all the taxation laws, and so he just force people to come, send his soldiers over to somebody's house and say, hey, it looks like you need to take a loan out to buy a new tractor. They say, I don't need a new tractor. I've got a tractor right here. It's perfectly fine. No, you really need to buy a new tractor. So tell you what, will you go ahead and loan me the money, and I'll help you get this tractor. And if you don't, we'll kill you. Okay, so it was like this mafia style type of thing. People hated it. It was not popular at all. And he began also creating special courts called a star court and a high court or something like that censored and punished anyone who didn't conform to King Charles's high Anglican, i.e. Catholic light religion. Okay, so censorship is starting to come back. These Roman Catholic concepts of violence in order to get people to conform are starting to come back into the kingdom, and so it's bothering the people, naturally. They had just finally been released from Roman Catholic rule, and now it looks like it's going back to a deep state Roman Catholic kingdom, and no doubt people are not happy. So Charles, in 1628, he brings Parliament again together to raise taxes, and Cromwell happens to be in attendance at this time. He's just there, but Parliament asserts their right to refuse the king's taxation, and so the king decided to dissolve Parliament again, and at that point, he's like, I'm done with Parliament. We're not doing this anymore. And so it was 11 years, actually, before Parliament ever reconvened. And the king was ruling himself, and this is called the period of personal rule. And so it'd be like the president saying, you know what, we're done with the House of Representatives, done with the Senate, we're done with the Supreme Court. I am just going to do it all myself. That's what happened. It was a bad situation. All right, so Cromwell in 1636, a few years after that, by that time, England is going through a tough time. They're financially broke. There's a lot of corruption coming in. The king is doing whatever he wants. So there's a languishing in the empire, and Cromwell finds himself broke, and he's thinking about going to America to join up with the Pilgrims. But in a strange twist of fate, his rich uncle dies and leaves him an immense fortune. How fortunate. How fortunate for Oliver. 3 years later, King Charles tries to force his religious beliefs on Scotland. So he's trying to get his Catholic light religion forced onto Scotland, which is a Presbyterian country, and that ended up starting the Bishops' War. Now, I'm going through a lot of history here, and we're going to slow down once we get to some of the more important points, but I want to get through some of this to kind of get us up to where we need to be. All right, so you have to bear in mind that Scotland had also been hardly united to England for 40 years. Okay, so technically they're united, but just it's very tentative, their situation. So by the king trying to force his religion on Scotland, that started a war, and the war resulted in Scotland winning and occupying northern England. So that didn't work out very well for King Charles I. And the deal was, okay, we will just end the war, but you have to pay for all of our expenses of the war. Well, Charles was already broke, and that was going to be really difficult to do. And he had a foreign army in the north. He had no money. So Charles had no point but to, or no other option but to reconvene Parliament. All right, so he gets Parliament together after 11 years, and you can imagine how happy everybody is to see King Charles. That Parliament didn't go very well. And they basically blasted him for being a terrible king and getting himself into all this trouble. And so he says, well, you know what? I'm going to dissolve Parliament. So he dissolves it again. All right? So 1640, Charles tries one more time to get Parliament together, to try to get them together just to raise taxes because he needs the money. Oliver Cromwell is in attendance at that Parliament again, except this time he's an MP. He's got a lot of money now, so he's got a lot of prestige, and now he's one of the main MPs there, all right? And he's from Cambridge. He's the MP of Cambridge. And he makes an impassioned speech against the king and all of his foolishness at this particular Parliament. And Charles ends up getting some tax money, but he also made it. But Parliament had also made it illegal for the king to dissolve Parliament without Parliament's consent. So they're like, we're not doing this anymore. We're not allowing you just to dissolve Parliament anytime you want. And King Charles was frustrated with that. And Parliament also stated openly that they did not like the fact that he had a Catholic wife. All right? And so things are falling apart, and it's around this time, just as a side note, at this same year, Scotland bans Christmas. Scotland bans Christmas first. Okay, well, we'll get to that. All right, so the next year, 1641, things are falling apart. There's a failed coup in Scotland to try to regain Scotland's dominance, and there's also a civil war raging in Ireland. You have the Protestants fighting the Catholics in Ireland. And Parliament in 1641 abolishes the Star Court for religious persecution, which is good. Parliament is starting to get a little bit of steam under them now. They're starting to kind of turn England back to Protestantism, because you have a mostly Protestant Parliament and a Anglican/Catholic light king on the throne. So you have this infighting. All right. In 1642, Charles is nearly bankrupt, and the Protestant Parliament's not really doing exactly what he wants. So he tries to arrest 5 members of Parliament. He tries to go in there and just arrest them by force. All right. Something that had never been done before. These particular parliamentary members were tipped off, and they were able to avoid arrest. But this failed move was so bold and so brash. It'd be like Donald Trump walking into the Senate and just saying, "You're under arrest, you're under arrest, you're under arrest, you're under arrest," without any warrant or anything like that. All right, so this was a big deal. This failed move caused King Charles to flee to London and begin assembling an army. And you know what he's assembling an army for? He's going to forcibly go in and take over, maybe even kill Parliament, who knows. So Parliament realizes, oh, we better get an army together too. So what you have here is the formation of the First English Civil War. It's a civil war between the Protestant Parliament and the Anglican Catholicish King of England, King versus Parliament. It'd be like Trump raising an army to fight the Senate and House of Representatives raising their own army, and this battle ensuing. All right? It'd be something like that. It's kind of a big deal. All right, so at this time, Oliver Cromwell, he's a farmer, he's not a soldier, but he ends up masterfully defending Cambridge from an attack by the king's forces. And after this battle, Cromwell saw how effective the king's horsemen, the cavalry, I always get cavalry and cavalry. Okay, the cavalry. He saw how effective the cavalry was and decided to get his own cavalry put together. And this one move ended up causing Cromwell to be virtually unstoppable on the battlefield. And so here this is year, 1641, 1642. Now we come to 1643. Everybody knows Scotland banned Christmas. Rumors are circulating about Parliament. Maybe they'll ban Christmas too. And so this guy named John Taylor, he's a waterman. He basically drives a water taxi. He writes a pamphlet warning everybody, hey, Parliament's getting ready to take away Christmas. All right? And Christmas is, and he's right. He's kind of like, Alex Jones was right, put a coin in the jar. Well, John Taylor was right. In the next year, Christmas is denounced by Parliament. Only denounced. They can't really pass any laws at this time. But Christmas is denounced by Parliament. Cromwell wasn't directly involved at this particular time, but he did support whatever Parliament decided to do. All right. So, let's see. I want to make sure I'm not missing something here. All right. So there's a decisive battle in 1645, the Battle of Naseby, where Cromwell wipes out the royal army. And also, it was during this year that Parliament had created a new directory of public worship where they declared that Sundays would be observed as holy days, but no other holy days were to be observed. Okay, so Parliament's starting to pass these religious laws in regards to days. Now, again, they're not formal laws. The king is still in charge, but they're trying to pass this legislation, these bills, to try to ban things that they perceive as non-biblical. All right, so in 1646, Cromwell takes Oxford, which is King Charles's stronghold. Charles escapes, I say in loose quotes. He was probably allowed to flee. They probably let him go. And he flees to his enemies, the Scots. Okay, the Scottish army. Well, the Scottish army, you remember, weren't really impressed with Charles. Okay, so they arrest him and they turn him over to Cromwell, and that's the end of the First English Civil War. So Cromwell is basically the guy that's in charge now, and Cromwell was a good man. I will say that, let me give you a picture here of Cromwell. Cromwell's a pretty good guy, honestly. I mean, if you read about Oliver Cromwell, it would be like reading about Donald Trump about 200 years from now. Like, you're going to get so many different perspectives of whether Trump was a good man, a bad man, a patriot, a despot. It's kind of like that, reading about Oliver Cromwell. He seems to be a very good man. And here's the thing. The reason why I think he was a good man is because he had the opportunity to take dictatorial control, and he could have ruled England if he wanted it. He had the power. He had the army. He had the popularity. He could have taken it all for himself, but what he continually is trying to do is he's not trying to take power to himself. He wants power to the people, and he wants to maintain the English monarchy and kind of keep things the way they are. It was good under King James. Let's try to keep that system. So he tries to, say, hey, let's put Charles back on the throne, but let's have some constitutional protections and just, make sure that, the king and parliament are working together. I'm not here to take over. Let's put Charles back on the throne. So, they start working these things out. And Charles, even though he lost the war, he's presented with this option, and he refuses to work with Parliament in any way whatsoever. All right? So he's restored as king, so to speak, but he's on a he's on a very thin rope, okay? He ends up making a secret deal with the Scots. After he's been restored to his throne by the graciousness of Cromwell and the Protestant army, okay, he makes a secret deal with Scotland and says, hey, listen, if you come here and take over Parliament and restore the kingdom to my authoritarian control and kill Cromwell, tell you what, I will make Britain a Presbyterian empire. I know you Scots like your Presbyterianism. How about we do that? All right? So essentially, the Scots liked the deal, and this resulted in the Second English Civil War. Stupid King Charles. And no one knew that King Charles was behind this sneaky government plot, at least not yet anyway. And so with that, let's go ahead and go to a break, and when we come back, I'll give you the rest of the history of Oliver Cromwell and the machinations of what was going on in England at this time, along with Oliver Cromwell stealing Christmas. Stay tuned. We'll be right back.
I hear the bells, they're ringing loud and clear. You can't help but love this time of year. It's Christmas time.
It's time for the Christmas Babylonian Fact of the Day. Have you ever been at your company Christmas party, minding your own business, and felt like you were being watched by an elf on the shelf? Supposedly, this creepy little doll is an undercover agent that has been tasked to watch you and your family and report back to Santa whether you've been naughty or nice. But did you know that this little Christmas miscreant has its origins in ancient idolatrous paganism? That's right. Since the days of ancient Babylon, idolaters have attributed consciousness to inanimate objects, and it was believed that these idols watched over people and influenced their daily lives in mysterious ways. In old Scottish and English legends, the elf on the shelf was called the Brownie and was a cobbler elf that helped with domestic tasks at night while everyone was sleeping. In Slovenia, his alias was the Scrat and was a shape-shifting fairy who brought riches to good people. The Greeks called him and his elf friends the Kalikatsaroi and believed that they came through the chimney and wreaked havoc during the 12 days of Christmas. In Celtic legends, the elf on the shelf, also known as the Bodak, was a traveling spirit who kidnapped children, especially during the winter holidays. The Italians called him La Befana, which means the witch, and believed that at nighttime he put presents in children's shoes set by the fireplace. And finally, the Germans called him Belsnickel, the spirit that came at Christmas time and whipped naughty children and rewarded good children. Obviously, an elf on the shelf is just a cotton-filled doll and is indeed nothing in this world. As a Christian, you don't necessarily need to be concerned about it, but you should certainly avoid attributing any power, luck, or sentience to it. When personality and power are attributed to inanimate objects like charms, talismans, amulets, stone idols, or stuffed dolls, devils are more than happy to capitalize on such playful superstitions, especially when it comes to children. Happy holidays from all of us at Final Fight Bible Radio.
And watch out for the Belschnickel on the shelf.
All right. So you have the situation where King Charles has hired a foreign army to come and overthrow the government so that he can get back in control. Once again, kind of a big deal. Okay. So Oliver Cromwell is called upon again to deal with this problem, and it was at this time, right around this time, so 1646 is when the King Charles hired the Scottish army. 1647, you start, and the Second English Civil War is afoot. During this time, 1647, Christmas and Easter are officially banned by Parliament. Now, Cromwell was not involved with this, and Parliament and the king, they're not really on speaking terms, so they're still kind of trying to do their government thing without the king, and they ban Christmas at this time. And Oliver Cromwell, he's busy trying to ward off the Northern Army of the Scottish, and deal with this civil war that's raging. And Cromwell in 1948 or 1648 annihilates the Scottish forces, and Cromwell takes more government issues now into his own hands because he realizes, okay, I gave the crown back to the king last time. That obviously didn't work. He can't be trusted. So he ends up saying, okay, fine, I'm going to take a little bit more control. Remember, he's a commander of a military. He's a military dictator technically at this point. Now, when we think military dictator, we always have a very bad connotation with that. But it'd be kind of like if General Michael Flynn, commanded the military was the military dictator, let's say, of Washington for whatever reason. He's a good man. And that would not necessarily be the worst of situations. Okay? Especially if you had like a Kamala Harris as president and then he was able to regain the government. I'd rather have Michael Flynn as the military dictator than Kamala Harris as the corrupt deep state president. So it's kind of like that. All right, so Cromwell takes power into his own hands to a degree. He gets rid of people out of members of parliament who are against the parliamentary army. Basically, he's clearing out, he's weeding out, he's draining the swamp. He's getting rid of people that have Catholic sympathies. He's getting rid of people that have Scottish Presbyterian sympathies. He's getting rid of people that have leanings towards King Charles, and he's draining the swamp. So what's really left over is just a bunch of Protestants in government. And Cromwell ends up finding out that King Charles had been behind the Scottish uprising. Now, you have to understand, that's a big deal. King Charles of England hired a foreign army to come and take over his own country to put him back in power. That's treason. Okay, that's a big deal. Just because he's the king doesn't mean that he gets to do that kind of thing. That is treason. And so Charles is tried for treason in January 30th, 1649. He's tried for treason against England and is publicly beheaded by Cromwell. Now, King Charles I is the only king of England that was ever killed like that, regicide, committed treason and killed for it. All right, so that's kind of a big deal. All right, that's never happened before in history, but Cromwell did it. And honestly, in my opinion, he did the right thing. I mean, King Charles, it doesn't matter if he's the king, he's not above the law. And he was trying to overthrow his own country. Yes, you get beheaded for that. Yes, you do. Okay, so Cromwell, he doesn't make himself into a king, though, or take over, even though he could have if he wanted to. The monarchy has basically been abolished, and England now is referred to as a commonwealth. And Cromwell gives authority to Parliament, and Cromwell has other matters to deal with anyway, so he has to deal with the Irish, because they're a problem in England's backyard. So in 1650, Cromwell, by some historian accounts, massacres the Irish. I don't know enough about the history to comment one way or the other, but essentially they were Roman Catholic people. He besieges the city and kills not only the soldiers, but also innocent civilians. It's one of those things. I mean, you're dealing with this deep state and the Roman Catholic Church. I mean, you've got Jesuits among the people that are revolutionaries that are an existential threat to your country. So what do you do? So anyway, it is what it is. He wins the war. He comes back to England just in time to find out that Charles's son, Charles II, has now made a new deal with Scotland, and the Scots have proclaimed King Charles King of Scotland. All right, so you got to imagine that Oliver Cromwell is probably like pulling his hair out, dealing with all this stuff. All right. Parliament demands that Scotland now needs to be crushed. Okay, so this results in the Third English Civil War. Once again, Oliver Cromwell's like, ugh, I just got back from war. I've already won 2 civil wars. Now I got to go fight a third one. But he's the guy for the job. So Cromwell goes north, and in September he defeats the Scottish armies, ending the war. And at this time, laws are passed in Parliament that now punishes anybody who tries to observe Christmas. And John Taylor, he writes his pamphlet about the Vindication of Christmas and argues that Christmas should be restored. And if you're watching online, you have this picture that he wrote of this tract where you have the Protestants saying, "Keep out, you, come not here," speaking to Father Christmas. And Father Christmas is saying, "Oh, sir, I bring good cheer." And then the common people are saying, "Old Christmas, you're welcome here, do not fear." All right, so it's like this, you got these political commentators, these podcasters in these days that are, stirring up different viewpoints among the people, and this guy was one of them. But I want to point out, before I get too much more into this history, why was England against Christmas? Why were the Scottish against Christmas? What's so bad about Christmas? Okay, so you have to remember that Christmas in the 1600s was not like the Christmas of the 2000s, okay? There was no Santa Claus, there was no Coca-Cola and polar bears. It wasn't about, getting together with family and sharing gifts and things like that, although that was a little piece of it. Back in the 1500s and 1600s, ladies and gentlemen, Christmas was more along the lines of Saturnalia than anything. It was basically still a pagan festival, just with a few Christian names that had been slapped on it, thanks to the Roman Catholic Church. But the festival itself was still extremely pagan. Christmas was more of what we would think in terms of like Halloween, all right? The modern Halloween, and Christians rightly having an issue with Halloween, in my opinion, because it is openly celebration of demons, witches, and ghosts, and all things that are contrary to Christianity. That was more about what Christmas was like in those days. Christmas was largely focused on adult entertainment, okay, and everything that comes with adult entertainment. And it was more, you had the Lord of Misrule. You didn't have Santa Claus. You had the Lord of Misrule. And what that meant, and it wasn't just a one-day festival, with Christmas Eve and Christmas. No, it was 12 days of revelry, 12 days of society being turned upside down, literally. It was 12 days of Saturnalia. It was where the king would appoint the Lord of Misrule, and he's basically in charge, and he gets to tell anybody what they have to do, including all kinds of acts of debauchery. All right, so people are getting drunk, people are fornicating, people are just doing all kinds of crazy stuff, and it's not a very Christian holiday, okay? And it's a Saturnalia. And as the author of The Cult of the Black Cube points out, he says, one might reasonably ask why such a bizarre festival was celebrated at all, when it must have caused some awkwardness when it was over, much like any good party does when the majority of guests are intoxicated and wild. The reply to both objections is that the ancients truly did believe that the gods were real beings and not simply the vapid archetypes that modern occultism has reduced them to. The Romans and Greeks believed that Saturn, or Kronos, was an actual deity, malevolent in character, and that this festival, this 12-day festival of Saturnalia, was intended to appease Saturn, Kronos, so that he would not curse them with long-term or even permanent social chaos. If the celebrations were carried out half-heartedly, people believed that Saturn would be angered, and thus debauchery and madness needed to be embraced and reveled in order to appease the god. All right? And so there are no records of Roman nobles objecting publicly to the festivals, even though servants became the rulers and the rulers became the servants. It was just a weird time. But there's no records of Roman nobles objecting publicly to the festivals. At worst, some admitted that they tried to escape from it by traveling away at that time. All right, so that's what was going on with Christmas, and that's why Christmas was banned in these Christian, Protestant, Puritan countries, Presbyterian countries. Calvinism had a huge hold. There's a lot of Puritans, and so they were very much what we would think about in terms of conservative Christians. You know, they were KJV Bible believers. They just had their new KJV Bible. Although, like I said, I use that term loosely because they're Calvinists. You know, so Calvinism is not biblical. But the rest of the stuff in terms of dress codes, how people are supposed to act, the perception of the need for, you know, this outward holiness, you know, and all these things, that was very prolific at the time and very much a part of government. And so you could imagine what would happen if KJV Bible believers took over the government. And I have to be honest, I'm a KJV Bible believer, but growing up in KJV Bible believing circles, that would be an absolute disaster. As a matter of fact, this actually happened in England, and it was an absolute disaster. Let me get you there. Let's get caught up. 1653, Parliament accomplishes nothing except seemingly going mad with power and enacting a bunch of useless laws. And they also wanted to end elections permanently. And so Cromwell's had enough. He enters into Parliament. He's sick and tired of Parliament. He's realizing, yeah, Parliament is basically worthless. And with guns drawn, he tells them, in the name of God, go. So Cromwell gives Parliament one last shot in July of 1963, and he handpicks 144 MPs who are essentially Bible believers. This is really interesting because, like I said, they have the King James Bible now, so they're King James Bible believers. They're Puritans, they're Protestants, and he's sick and tired of this corrupt Parliament with all these rhinos and Democrats and socialists and all this stuff going on. Typical type of thing. They're all fighting. They can't pass any legislation or do anything worthwhile for the people. So Cromwell says, you know what? I'm going to dissolve Parliament and I'm going to bring up a new Parliament, and this Parliament is going to be filled with Bible-believing Christians. Can you imagine? When Bible-believing Christians ruled England. It's so amazing. I never even knew this happened, but it did. But the thing is, this only lasted, I think, for like 5 weeks. 5 weeks or 5 months. I don't remember which. I have it written here somewhere. Where did it go? I don't know. Anyway, where did those notes go? Anyway, it bothers me that I don't know where my notes went that I had on this. I wanted to read some. Oh, here it is. Here it is. Found it. All right. So Bible believers take over the government. This ended up being a disaster. And Cromwell, in retrospect, well, what ends up happening is these Bible believers get in, and they start passing laws without proper legal authority, without proper voting. They're just going hardcore. Let's fix the problem. And this book called Oliver Cromwell, written in 1901, talking about this, says the convention of the 144 MPs is the high water mark of the biblical politics of the time of Puritanism applying itself to legislation, political construction, and social regeneration. And everybody was excited at first. You know, Oliver Cromwell himself said, I confess I never looked to see such a day as this when Jesus Christ should be so owned as he is this day in this work. God manifests this to be the day of the power of Christ, having through so much blood and so much trial as hath been upon these nations, made this to be one of the greatest issues thereof, to have his people, i.e. Christian Bible believers, called to the supreme authority of England. All right, and they preached tolerance. You know, it was good. They said, you know what, guys, we need to be pitiful. We need to have respect unto everybody and be pitiful and tender towards all. Even if they have different judgments, we need to love everybody. We need to have charity. And even if the worst Christian, the most mistaken, you know, Laodicean loser Christian shall desire to leave peaceably and quietly, you know, then let him be protected. You know, so they had some good things going for them. But within a few weeks began the dissipation of the dream. The most zealous were the worst simpletons. So true. And these people, Parliament, they're giving all these Bible speeches, basically preaching sermons in Parliament, and they say, there's been 4 monarchies of Nebuchadnezzar and Cyrus and Alexander and Rome. They each passed away, and the day has come for the 5th and final monarchy, the kingdom of Jesus Christ upon the earth. So they think they've brought in the millennium, literally, post-millennialists. And they set to work with a will at legislation. They run a bill through all its stages in one setting. They don't have trial by jury because they can't trust the jury, they say. And they set a committee with a lawyer upon it to work upon the reduction of formless massive laws, cases, and precedents. So basically they're cutting out all the red tape without even thinking about it. They're just chip, chip, chip. Things that, might be annoying. There's some things in government and laws that are there for a reason. They're probably like, let's get rid of the speed limits. And so, that's legalism. And so they're getting rid of speed limits and all this stuff. And it ended up falling apart because there was this fight about tithing, whether the government should pay church ministers or not. And so the people in the country, they're like, holy cow, Bible believers have taken over the government. They are just going hog wild. And, the clergy is mad at the Bible-believing parliament. The people are mad at the Bible-believing parliament. And even Cromwell himself perceived in his own words that the issue of this assembly would have been the subversion of the laws and of all the liberties of their nation, the destruction of the ministers of the gospel, in short, the confusion of all things, and instead of order, to set up the judicial law of Moses in abrogation of all our English administrations. So he confesses in his book, there's a quote there where he's saying, I thought this was a good idea at first. I did it in my simplicity, but I realized that was probably the dumbest thing I ever could have done, is put a bunch of Bible believers in charge of the government. And he said that basically what he concluded, I don't have it written here somewhere, but I don't know where it went, was he basically, in so many words, he said, government is a little bit harder to run than most people realize. And it's not something that you're just going to be able to walk in with a Bible and fix all of its problems. And I say a wholehearted amen to that, honestly. So anyway, they tried it. If you ever thought, I wonder what it would be like if KJV Bible believers took over the government. Well, it happened. 1963 or 1653, and it was a disaster. So anyway, Cromwell, the Bible-believing members of Parliament, to their credit, they realized also that this wasn't working. And so they said, you know what, we're going to dissolve ourselves. Cromwell, you take charge. He didn't want to be the king, but he's literally the last legal man standing in government. So he basically is the king, but he doesn't take the title. He takes the title Lord Protector. Now, I'm going to go a little bit longer than I normally do, just because this is so interesting, and I'm almost done. All right, so he becomes Lord Protector, and a new constitution is drawn up to split power between Cromwell and a 15-man Council of State. So a new constitution is drawn up that splits power between Cromwell and this 15 council members of state. There's no more parliament. It's just these 15 people. And they end up then creating a new parliament with 400 seats. And for the first time, Scotland and Ireland were given 300 seats. Or, I mean, not 300 seats. They're given 30 seats. Okay, so now Scotland and Ireland are getting to participate in parliament. And a free election was enacted, but due to the divided populace of the people, kind of like how we have it today in America, you have a lot of liberals, you have Antifa, you have socialists, you have conservatives, you have libertarians, you have globalists. It's kind of like that in England. Because there was such a divided populace, a lot of the people that ended up getting voted into Parliament were people that were royalists or globalists. They're old enemies of Cromwell. Presbyterians get in there, and even some Marxist-type people got in there who believed that wealth should be equally distributed between the rich and the poor. All right, so in spite of what Cromwell hoped Parliament would become, a body of stabilization for England, machinations began immediately to reduce Cromwell's power and undermine the English military. So all these people are voted into Parliament, and the first thing they do is start saying, you know what, we need to take power away from Cromwell and diminish his army. And so Cromwell knew where this was going, and he probably knew that it would result in a fourth civil war before too long, so he nipped it in the bud and dissolved that Parliament. And so everybody began to see Cromwell, like, he keeps dissolving Parliament. Is he, like, doing his own thing? They start seeing him as, like, this doppelganger of King Charles I. And so his popularity poll numbers began to go down. Now, as Cromwell was dealing with these issues and losing popularity, a guy named Roddick attempted to organize a royalist uprising to put Charles II, who was in Scotland, back onto the English throne. All right, so this attempt didn't work. It didn't gather the steam it needed, and it fizzled out. However, it caused Oliver Cromwell to realize that England's government was so extremely unstable and so extremely fragile that he scrapped the new constitution, and he finally reluctantly set up a military dictatorship. It basically became martial law, and England was divided into 12 districts, and they each get one seat. All right, so 1656, Cromwell tries setting up a new parliament again. Again, he's trying to give power back to the people, But this parliament, it would not be freely elected. It would be purged of anyone that Cromwell thought were globalists or troublemakers or Marxists or Catholics for all practical purposes. All right. And so by this time, a lot of people are just outright ignoring the Christmas ban. Government is so screwed up that people don't even care that they're not supposed to celebrate it. They do anyway. All right. 1657, a new parliament votes to make Cromwell the king, mostly for practical reasons, because England needed to have a king in order to sign legislation into official laws. So they had to have a king. So they wanted Cromwell to be the king. So on June 26th, Cromwell is coronated, which for all practical purposes was his becoming the King of England. But he still wanted to keep the title Lord Protector. He didn't want to be king. All right. 1658, Parliament votes to readmit members of Parliament that Cromwell had excluded. So again, Parliament just keeps wanting to bring in the Democrats. Parliament just wants to keep these rhinos in Parliament who are supposed to be on Cromwell's side, supposed to be for the people. They keep voting in globalist Democrat libtards. All right? And so Cromwell ends up having to dissolve Parliament again. And so this is 1658, and shortly after this, Cromwell's daughter dies. His favorite daughter dies, and something in him died also. And I have a daughter, I could understand. But something in Cromwell, just the light burnt out. And at that point, he was done with it. September 3rd, a few months later, Oliver Cromwell, he dies. He's just kind of done. And he had become secluded. He had become very isolated after his daughter died, and like nobody could really get a hold of him anymore. And he was just like, he was over it. And so he ends up dying a few months later. All right, his son takes the throne, his son Richard, but he ends up being deposed by Parliament. And so an army is led by General George Monk, and he didn't really like Cromwell. He marches into London, demands that all the excluded members of Congress, Parliament, all the Democrats and globalists be put back into Parliament. All right, so they're restored, and they restored the old Parliament, and they vote, and so essentially they have this new Parliament in here now, and General Monk gives a secret message to King Charles up in Scotland to issue a declaration of religious leniency and religious toleration, which sounds good for Protestant Bible believers who are still being persecuted to a degree, but the problem with the religious freedom is you still have Catholics who are being subdued in England, and so by giving religious liberty in England, you are also opening the door for the Roman Catholic Jesuits to come back into your country. So that's where it was kind of a problem with religious liberty, and honestly, that was kind of the Achilles heel for our American government as well. The freedom of religion is great, but it becomes a problem when you have Roman Catholic Jesuits trying to overthrow your country and Islamic terrorists taking advantage of your religious liberty to kill you and rape your wives and daughters. All right, so religious liberty is kind of a catch-22. So you have this situation where the new parliament votes Charles back into power, restores Charles II as King of England, but with limitations to his power. Charles II is a semi-Catholic, but the thing is his brother, James II, is a hardcore Catholic. And so Charles II, as soon as he takes over the throne, declares that all legislation passed between 1642 to 1660 is rendered null and void. Everything Cromwell did is undone. But hey, Christmas is back. Christmas is back, everybody. All right, so he restores Christmas. All right, now it's 1661. We're almost done. Oliver Cromwell's body is dug up, beheaded, and his head is stuck on a pike outside of Congress, outside of Westminster, where Parliament met. And his head is on that pike, his skull, his corroding, corruptible, flesh falling off skull is on a pike outside of Washington, D.C., for all practical purposes, outside of Parliament, for 24 years. That's how they thought. That's what they thought about Cromwell. Now, again, King Charles, he's more of a friend of the Pope, and that's why they hated Cromwell so much, because he was a Christian, he was a good man, he was a Bible-believing Christian, and he was trying to do the best he could for his people. And authoritarians hate people like that. King Charles II dies in 1685, and the crown goes to his brother, James II, the hardcore Roman Catholic. Oh boy. England is back under Catholic control. King James II's wife, Mary of Modena, has a child which locked in the potential of a new royal Catholic dynasty in England. This is a disaster. So really quick, 7 Protestant nobles traveled to the Netherlands and asked William of Orange to bring an army to England to save them from a Catholic takeover. William of Orange was James II's nephew and son-in-law, which is weird. William married his cousin, which was James II's daughter. So that made him James II's son-in-law and nephew. All right, so William of Orange comes in and basically overthrows his uncle and father-in-law. This was called the Glorious Revolution. James II fled to Roman Catholic France. The crown is offered to William, but he refuses it and said that Parliament should be convened to decide. So the next year, in 1689, Parliament votes that the crown be given to William and his wife, Mary. An English Bill of Rights was passed with specific allowance for Protestants to have the ability to bear arms for self-defense. A right of trial by jury is set into stone. Protected members of Parliament from any prosecution for any speech. So you have freedom of speech coming about. And you have freedom of religion, but freedom of religion was not included due to the Catholic Church deep state problem. And also there was a designation of a royal line of succession to only allow Protestant families and as people that can inherit the throne, and the laws specifically banned Catholics from the throne. And a religious liberty was given to Protestants through the Toleration Act passed that year, and all those things set the stage for the English Bill of Rights or the American Bill of Rights and Constitution that came in the years following. All right, so I've gone 10 minutes over time, and I won't get into all the rest of the things, but I find there are some interesting parallels with what was going on in England in those days and what's kind of going on with our government in these days. I know that Trump is I appreciate President Trump. He's doing the best he can to try to not be a dictator in spite of what people say that he's doing. He's trying to bring the country back from the edge of a cliff through congressional and through constitutional law. He's not trying to overthrow the laws. He's trying to bring America back while maintaining the Constitution. But admittedly, we are so far gone as a nation, it is very difficult to do. And I appreciate his attempts, but sometimes you almost wish that he would just declare martial law and purge the criminals, globalist, Jesuit, Illuminati, globalist, murderous, killers, criminals, Marxists out of our government and just allow us to start over. Maybe he'll have to do that. I don't know. I know he doesn't want to do that, but he would be kind of like the King James, who is just going to keep butting heads with Parliament, and maybe the next guy will be a little bit too hardcore and start overstepping the Constitution in order to bring about justice in the country. But overstepping the Constitution is also going to create a lot of problems as well. That would be like King Charles, and then the military would have to get involved, and that might be General Michael Flint. So there's a lot of interesting things with all of that. One last thing I want to point out is there's King James was a blessing to the church, the primarily Gentile body of Christ, in that he gave us the King James Bible. Not he himself personally, understandably, but under his authority, he gave the church the King James Bible, bless the people of God. And I can't help but wonder if Trump is also going to be used in a similar way to bless the people of God, except it'll be the Jewish people of God by giving them a temple. A lot of interesting things. Hope the lesson was a blessing. And I would be remiss if I didn't end this episode of How Oliver Cromwell Stole Christmas with my own rendition of You're a Subtle One, Mr. Grinch, with my own rendition, You're a Subtle One, Mr. Leviathan. Thank you for tuning in. God bless you. Have a good week. We'll see you 2 Fridays from now. God bless.
You're a subtle one, Mr. Leviathan, more subtle than any beast of the field. You humbled Eve in Eden, you're the king of the children of pride, Mr. Leviathan. You're the lion that walketh about, seeking whom he may devour. You're a fallen one, Mr. Leviathan, with 3 more falls to go. You'll be cast down in the tribulation, Armageddon and the great white throne, Mr. Leviathan. Praise God he delivered me from you 22 and a half years ago. You're a smart one, Mr. Leviathan. Thou art wiser than Daniel. You've convinced the Christian scholars that you're simply a crocodile, Mr. Leviathan. Even a cursory reading of Job 41 shows it can't possibly be a crocodile. You're a monster, Mr. Leviathan. You make the deep to boil like a pot. You're a murderer from the beginning. You're a liar and the father of it, Mr. Leviathan. The three words that Jesus used to describe your activities are as follows, and I quote: steal, kill, destroy. You're a cherub, Mr. Leviathan, but you appear as an angel of light. You're a wicked, crooked serpent, one would be cast down at your sight, Mr. Leviathan. Your soul is a workmanship of taborets and pipes, and is responsible for the most ungodly music imaginable. Rock, rap, jazz, country, rhythm, and blues. You're a religious one, Mr. Leviathan, but it's a fake, pharisaical fraud. You're a seven-headed dragon that mystery Babylon sitteth upon, Mr. Leviathan. Your scarlet woman is drunk with the blood of the saints and martyrs, and is the Roman Catholic Church.